In Maplewood, Texas, a peaceful town known for its sprawling ranches and quiet streets, a horrifying secret was brewing. A teenage girl with her whole life ahead of her met an unthinkable end. What would drive someone to such an act of brutality? Could love and jealousy twist a person to the point of no return? Rachel Ann Sullivan, a 19-year-old with a warm smile and a heart full of dreams, had always stood out for her kindness. Working as a barista in the town's favorite coffee shop, she was saving money for college in Austin, where she hoped to study social work and make a difference in people's lives. After losing her father in a car accident when she was just a child, Rachel had become the glue that held her family together. She looked after her younger siblings, Abby and Caleb, as if they were her own, spending her free time helping with homework or taking them to the park. Her life took an unexpected turn when she met Deputy James Holloway at a town fundraiser. Holloway, 44, was charming and well known in Maplewood for his approachable demeanor and dedication to law enforcement. Their secret relationship grew quickly, though Rachel knew it was forbidden. She was a teenager torn between the excitement of the taboo and her dreams. In early July 2017, Rachel discovered she was pregnant. Fear and excitement consumed her as she considered what this would mean for her life. She confided in her closest friend, unsure of how to tell James, or how his wife, a woman known for her fiery temper, might react. On July 16th, Rachel decided to confront James, hoping for support and envisioning a future where they could navigate this unexpected path together. The next morning, tragedy struck. Rachel's younger sister, Abby, discovered her lifeless body in a desolate patch of woods near Highway 15. Bruised and beaten, Rachel's dreams and her future were stolen in one night of rage-fueled violence. What could have happened during that final meeting? And how far would jealousy push someone to destroy a young life so full of promise? Abby stood frozen, the chilling image of her sister's lifeless body etched in her mind. Her breath quickened as tears streamed down her face, but the shock rooted her to the ground. Gathering all the courage she could muster, she ran back to the house and grabbed the phone, her trembling fingers barely managing to dial 911. Words stumbled out as she struggled to explain the horror she had just witnessed. Minutes later, flashing lights filled the quiet morning near Highway 15. First responders found her seated on the front steps, wrapped in a blanket by their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had rushed over after hearing the commotion. The air was thick with whispers as neighbors gathered, their voices a mix of sympathy and shock. Just a day earlier, Rachel had been seen laughing with friends at the local diner, a stark contrast to the devastating scene that now consumed the town. Detective Olivia Reynolds, an experienced investigator with a straightforward approach, arrived on the scene with her partner, Officer Ethan Walker, who was eager to prove himself in the field. Together, they combed through the area near Rachel's body. It was a barren, desolate clearing just off the highway, littered with broken glass and cigarette butts. Her bruised and battered form lay motionless, surrounded by signs of a violent struggle. Scratches on nearby tree bark suggested she had tried to fight back. A torn piece of fabric, snagged on a jagged bush, caught Detective Reynolds' eye. Nearby, faint marks in the dirt resembled tire tracks, as if someone had driven off in a hurry. Among the scattered debris, the detectives found an empty pill bottle and a lighter, raising questions about who else might have been present that night. As the body was examined, the medical examiner noted a faint swelling in Rachel's abdomen. Preliminary results suggested she had been several weeks pregnant. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation, especially when paired with rumors circulating in Maplewood about her secret relationship with Deputy Holloway. Detective Reynolds, her gaze sharp and focused, knew this detail would blow the case wide open. The community, still reeling, demanded answers. With the evidence mounting, suspicion began to point toward Holloway, a man whose polished public image now appeared increasingly tarnished. Reynolds and Walker meticulously logged every detail, knowing the town's eyes were fixed on them as they unraveled the truth behind Rachel Sullivan's tragic death. When questioned about Rachel, Deputy Holloway's composure wavered, revealing cracks in the polished facade of Maplewood's trusted lawman. Initially, he claimed their interactions were casual, explaining that he had first met Rachel at the coffee shop where she worked. He mentioned stopping by occasionally during his patrols, offering her career advice and even helping her prepare for her college applications. As the interrogation deepened, Holloway reluctantly admitted to a relationship that had grown personal and then physical over the past several months. He described it as a lapse in judgment, attempting to frame his actions as misguided compassion. The confession, however, quickly unraveled as Detective Reynolds pushed further, uncovering troubling inconsistencies in his statements. Holloway revealed that Rachel had told him about the pregnancy just days before her death, and while he insisted he was prepared to provide financial support, his detached demeanor raised suspicions. Digging into Holloway's financial records, Reynolds and her team uncovered a series of untraceable payments funneled through obscure channels, totaling thousands of dollars. These payments, disguised as consulting fees, had been made to multiple women over the past decade. Each payment followed a similar pattern: a brief liaison with a young woman, followed by a pregnancy and a discreet payoff to ensure silence. The investigators' discovery painted a damning picture of a man abusing his position of power to exploit vulnerable women. As Holloway grew evasive, his wife Clara Holloway entered the investigation. A well-known figure in Maplewood's social circles, she owned a charming antique shop in the heart of town and was often regarded as the more refined half of the couple. Behind her polished exterior, however, detectives uncovered years of pent-up resentment and suspicion. During her interview, Clara didn't hold back. She spoke candidly about her growing distrust of her husband, describing nights spent alone while he claimed to be on late patrols. She recounted finding lipstick-stained collars and vague text messages on his phone that he dismissed as work-related. But it was an accidental discovery, weeks before Rachel's death, that shattered her denial. While tidying Holloway's home office, Clara stumbled upon a hidden folder on his laptop containing intimate videos. One video in particular showed her husband with a much younger woman, Rachel Sullivan. The revelation left Clara humiliated and seething. She admitted to confronting Holloway in a heated argument that ended with his insistence that the affair was over. But Clara's words carried a chilling undertone as she described the betrayal. When someone you trust breaks everything you believe in, you start to wonder what you're really capable of. Her confession left the investigators uneasy as the line between victim and suspect began to blur. Her discovery of the intimate video had shattered her already fragile world, but the casual remark from a friend about Rachel's purchase of prenatal vitamins at Haven Pharmacy turned her devastation into fury. Clara felt the walls of her life collapsing. Every whispered rumor, every unexplained late night, and every suspicious glance suddenly made horrifying sense. She denied any direct confrontation with Rachel during her initial interviews, but text messages recovered from her phone painted a different story. In one message, she had demanded Rachel meet her at Pinewood Park to discuss this disgraceful mess. Witnesses later described seeing the two women in the park that day, their conversation escalating into a loud argument near the old wooden gazebo. Clara reportedly waved a pair of pruning shears, her voice sharp with accusations, branding Rachel as a manipulative girl intent on destroying her family. Rachel had reportedly walked away quickly, clutching her bag and visibly shaken, but the interaction left investigators questioning Clara's next steps. She admitted to detectives that her emotions had spiraled out of control in the weeks leading up to Rachel's death. "I wasn't thinking clearly," she told Detective Olivia Reynolds during a tense interview. "It felt like everything I had worked for was slipping away." The discovery of drug paraphernalia near Rachel's body introduced an unexpected twist. Among the items were a used syringe and a small packet of what appeared to be crushed pills. Lab results later linked the substances to Abby, her younger sister, known for her reserved demeanor but hiding a darker struggle with substance abuse. Detectives speculated whether Abby's addiction could have played a role in Rachel's death. One theory proposed that Rachel, always protective of her siblings, had discovered Abby's involvement with dangerous individuals and had attempted to intervene. Another theory suggested she had offered financial help, despite her modest barista wages, to cover Abby's drug debts, potentially putting herself in harm's way. The Sullivan family's tight-knit image began to unravel as neighbors came forward with stories of tension between the sisters. One witness recalled hearing raised voices from their home just days before Rachel's death, with what sounded like her pleading for Abby to stop before it's too late. The conflict between Rachel's protective instincts and Abby's struggles became a new focal point for the investigation. Detective Reynolds, however, was not quick to settle on a single suspect. With Clara Holloway's volatile emotions and the tangled web of Abby's addiction, the case was rapidly becoming one of Maplewood's most complex and chilling mysteries. Abby's trembling hands fidgeted in her lap as she sat in the Stark interview room, her tear-streaked face reflecting the weight of her secrets. For hours, she had danced around the truth, but when Reynolds pressed her about her sister's connection to Deputy James Holloway, the floodgates opened. She admitted that she had been hiding an addiction for more than a year, which had begun soon after their mother passed away. What began as experimentation with prescription pills quickly escalated into a dependence on harder substances. Her clandestine dealings had introduced her to a network of dangerous individuals in Maplewood, many of whom operated under the radar of law enforcement. But the true twist came when Abby confessed that Deputy Holloway had discovered her drug use months earlier. According to her, Holloway had stumbled upon her during a routine patrol in a dimly lit parking lot near the abandoned Silver Line Cinema, a known hotspot for drug activity. Instead of arresting her, he offered her a chilling proposition: remain silent about his extramarital escapades in exchange for overlooking her offenses. His leverage didn't stop there. She claimed he occasionally used her as a courier, exploiting her naivety to transport small packages to avoid suspicion. Rachel's involvement began when she discovered Abby's growing entanglement with Holloway. Abby recalled the night her sister confronted her, her voice trembling with both fear and fury. "This stops now," Rachel had demanded, her protective instincts overriding any concern for her own safety. Rachel had marched straight to Holloway's office at the precinct. Later, Abby found out that her sister had begged Holloway to let her go from his clutches by offering herself as collateral. Rachel had consented to keep up a false relationship to him in exchange, one that she thought would protect her sister from more danger. But her sacrifice came at a cost. Abby described the changes she saw in her once spirited sister. Rachel had grown withdrawn, often staring into the distance as if burdened by a secret too heavy to bear. Her laughter, once frequent and infectious, had become rare, replaced by a lingering sadness that Abby couldn't ignore. Abby's confession revealed the dark depths of manipulation and exploitation at play, casting Holloway in an even grimmer light. When Abby unwillingly brought up Clara, the investigators' suspicions of Holloway grew even more convoluted. She described overhearing a heated phone call between her sister and Clara just days before the murder. Clara's voice had been sharp and cutting, accusing Rachel of destroying her family and warning her to watch her back. On the night of Rachel's murder, Clara left her house with a singular purpose. Her anger had reached its boiling point, fed by the humiliation of her husband's affair and the knowledge of Rachel's pregnancy. Clara saw Rachel not just as a girl her husband had betrayed her with, but as the living proof of everything threatening her carefully maintained life. Clara took a heavy wooden club, a gardening tool she had grabbed from the garage earlier that evening, and drove toward the wooded area near Highway 15. Dressed in dark clothing to avoid being noticed, she parked a short distance from Rachel's usual path and waited in the shadows. Rachel appeared on the horizon, her pace slow, likely tired after her shift at the cafe. Clara stepped out of the car and intercepted her, blocking her path. Rachel stopped abruptly, her face showing a mix of confusion and apprehension. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cautious. Clara wasted no time. "You need to leave this town," she demanded coldly. "This ends tonight. You're not ruining my family." Rachel stood her ground, her voice steady despite her rising fear. "I didn't ruin anything. Your husband did," she retorted, her words laced with quiet defiance. The response sent Clara over the edge. She raised the wooden club without warning and swung it toward Rachel, striking her shoulder with a sickening thud. Rachel screamed, stumbling backward but trying to shield herself. Clara advanced, her fury blinding her to the blood and bruises already marking Rachel's body. Rachel tried to crawl away, pleading, "Stop, please!" But Clara couldn't hear her over the rage pounding in her head. She brought the club down again and again, each strike fueled by the betrayal and bitterness she had bottled up for years. When Rachel finally lay motionless on the ground, Clara stood over her, breathing heavily. Her hands, now trembling, loosened their grip on the club, letting it fall beside Rachel's lifeless body. Blood pooled around Rachel, staining the dirt and leaves beneath her. For a brief moment, she stared, frozen in shock at what she had done. Realizing the severity of her actions, she dragged Rachel's body further into the woods, hoping the darkness would conceal the crime. She wiped the wooden club with a cloth she had brought, but left it near the scene, unable to carry it back to her car. Returning home, she threw her bloodied clothes into a plastic bag, dumped it in her backyard garbage bin, and sank into bed, convincing herself that no one would ever suspect the sheriff's wife. On the morning of July 27, 2017, detectives arrived at the Holloway residence, their stern faces illuminated by the soft glow of sunrise. Clara opened the door dressed in her robe, holding a cup of coffee. At first, she greeted them as though expecting a neighborly visit, but the moment they announced the charges, her hand trembled, spilling coffee onto the porch. "I didn't do anything," Clara shouted, her voice breaking as officers led her out. Neighbors peeked through blinds and gathered in doorways, whispering about the fall of the once revered Holloway family. She avoided their eyes, her head bowed as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. For the Sullivans, news of the arrest brought a bittersweet relief. The void left by Rachel's death remained unbearable, but the prospect of justice offered a glimmer of solace. Meanwhile, the community's attention shifted to the impending trial, a spectacle that would expose the secrets and lies beneath Maplewood's pristine surface. The trial began in April of 2018, with media trucks lining the courthouse steps and locals crowding the gallery. Clara's defense attorney, Daniel Mercer, adopted a strategy that turned heads. He argued that Clara, a woman pushed to her emotional limits, had acted out of momentary rage, fueled by years of neglect and humiliation. Mercer painted a picture of a devoted wife betrayed by her husband's infidelity, a betrayal that culminated in the devastating revelation of Rachel's pregnancy. To bolster their case, the defense called on a psychologist who testified that Clara exhibited signs of emotional distress and acute anxiety at the time of the incident. He leaned heavily on this narrative, urging the jury to see Clara not as a murderer, but as a broken woman who had snapped under unimaginable pressure. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Margaret Ortiz, countered with precision. She presented damning evidence, including the wooden club recovered near Rachel's body, its handle bearing traces of Clara's fingerprints. She also highlighted a chilling detail. Clara had purchased the club just weeks before the murder, contradicting claims that her actions were unplanned. Ortiz's arguments painted Clara as calculating and deliberate, determined to remove Rachel as a threat to her marriage and reputation. Witnesses took the stand, recounting the heated confrontation at Pinewood Park and Clara's growing hostility toward Rachel. Ortiz emphasized how Clara's jealousy and desperation drove her to violence, urging the jury to recognize the premeditation behind the attack. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the Holloway family's carefully constructed image crumbled further. Deputy James Holloway, though not charged, faced public scorn for his role in the tangled web of lies and betrayal. For Maplewood's residents, the trial became a reckoning, exposing the darkness hidden behind the town's genteel facade. Clara's sentencing brought a tense stillness to the courtroom as the judge's gavel fell. Her 25-year sentence for second-degree murder left no room for parole, a decision that visibly shook her. Her stoic mask cracked as tears streamed down her face, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her fate. The gallery murmured, some expressing relief, others quietly questioning if justice had truly been served. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, their cameras capturing the solemn procession of family and lawyers leaving the building. While Clara's story transitioned to the Ohio Correctional Institution for Women, where she faced a regimented life of counseling and reflection, James Holloway's reckoning was only beginning. After looking more closely at his financial records, investigators discovered a network of fabricated expenditure claims. Funds allocated for community programs had been redirected as hush money for his numerous affairs, including payments to Rachel. By June 2018, he stood in court, facing charges of embezzlement and misconduct. The courtroom was notably less crowded than during Clara's trial, but the air was no less charged. His lawyer argued for leniency, portraying him as a man who had already lost everything: his career, his wife, and the respect of the community. But the prosecution presented a damning case, complete with records of transactions that painted him as a manipulative figure who had betrayed the public trust. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison, a lighter sentence than many expected, but one that left his reputation irreparably damaged. For Abby, the years following Rachel's death were a journey of recovery and rediscovery. Enrolling in a rehab program at the Maplewood Recovery Center, she confronted the grief and guilt that had consumed her. Surrounded by counselors and peers who understood her struggles, Abby began to heal. Her memories of her sister became a driving force, motivating her to channel her pain into something meaningful. In 2020, she graduated with a degree in social work from Texas State University, her diploma a testament to her resilience. She returned to Maplewood, where she started a support group for at-risk youth, hoping to guide them away from the path she had once taken. Her story inspired many in the community, who saw her as a beacon of hope amidst the tragedy. Once associated with respectability, the Holloway family name has come to represent betrayal and the catastrophic consequences of uncontrollable emotions. Years later, as Abby stood before a group of teens sharing her story, she spoke not of anger or blame, but of resilience. "Rachel gave me a second chance," she told them, her voice steady, "and I owe it to her to make it count."